for our final speaker of the day. That's not true. It would be of the afternoon. Tonight we're going to have two spectacular speakers at dinner, which is very exciting. But I'm delighted to introduce the man who needs no introduction, an advisor to GSV Accelerate and a dear friend, Arne Duncan.
Thank you, Deb, so much. Thanks for having me. I think I'm between you guys and drinks, so I'll try not to go for an hour here. We'll keep it pretty brief, and obviously this is an extraordinarily smart, committed audience, and happy to have some serious Q&A afterwards. So I'll try and keep my remarks relatively short. It's just been an interesting time coming out of the administration, interesting time in the country, just to reflect sort of on lessons learned, things that worked, things that didn't along the way. And recently wrote a book that forced me to sort of think back of a lifetime of this work, and just trying to sort of quickly walk you through the different steps along the journey, lessons learned, and sort of where I think we should think about going forward, not just for our kids and for education, but for our country and for our democracy. And I worry there, and I think education can play a real role in helping to keep our democracy strong. But got my passion for education. My dad taught at the University of Chicago, grew up on the campus there. I live 2 blocks from where I grew up. It's great to be back home. My kids go to the same school I went to. My wife taught there for 15 years. I was born in '64. My sister was born in '67. My brother in '70. And in 1961, my mother started a little after-school program that was literally like 11 blocks from where we lived. We used to walk there some days. But at that time, 47th Street was the barrier between middle-class integrated Hyde Park, where we lived, in all black, all poor North Kenwood, Oakland. And her program was in a church basement on 46th and Greenwood, just literally 1 block across that border. And we went there every single day as kids growing up. I took a year off from college between my junior and senior year to try and figure out, was this like a piece of who I was, or did it define who I was? And during that year, decided that I wanted to find some ways to follow in her footsteps. Just amazing lessons growing up in a community that was all black, all poor, violent, all the challenges we know and see. But just seeing the unbelievable potential of the kids that came to her program. I went back to her whole philosophy was 15-year-olds taught 10-year-olds, 10-year-olds taught 5-year-olds, so we all grew up teaching and being taught the whole way through. And there's a young guy named Kerry Holly who taught my group of kids for probably 8-10 years. When he was in high school and we were in elementary school, then he went to DePaul and stayed and kept working with us, and he went to law school. And I went back to interview him for the book, and just, he's like an older brother. I've known him, basically all my life. And he told me his birth story. And I used his name, wrote about it in the book. But he was like so many kids in the neighborhood, never met his father. Mother was candidly a prostitute, ran the streets, was raised by his grandmother. But I never heard his birth story. And when he told me something, he was born, his mother wrapped him in newspaper and threw him into garbage. And his grandmother fished him out of the garbage, raised him. And when he was 8, 9 years old, kept trying to come to my mother's program. She kept telling him she had too many kids. He lived just a block away, so she couldn't take him. Either he broke her down or something happened. Eventually he came. Kerry Holly is now, he was an IBM fellow, the first African-American IBM fellow in the history of the company. He travels the world, has patents. And you think of that narrow margin there. If his grandmother hadn't fished him out of the garbage, if he hadn't been so persistent at 8 or 9 years old to try and want something better, all the risk factors of every kid in every inner city across Chicago, with this amazing potential. And it's just one little example. And so what drives me every day, my motivation my whole life, is how many Kerry Hollies are out there that we're not reaching? How much talent are we losing because we don't give a chance, or we don't open a door, or we don't meet someone halfway? And that's I try to follow my mother's footsteps. My sister trains principals for Chicago Public Schools. My mother, unfortunately, has Alzheimer's now, and my brothers run the program for her. But that work was just absolutely formative for all of us. And just knowing what's possible when kids have opportunity and hope and high expectations and huge support. when I graduated from college, I played basketball overseas for a couple years, came back, and my sister and I ran an I Have a Dream program, working with, actually out of the same church basement as my mother's program, where we took the entire 6th grade class from Shakespeare Elementary, which is a school directly across the street from the church basement where my mother worked. And we promised that whole 6th grade class we would pay for their college education if they made it through high school, model based on some great work Eugene Lang had done in New York. So my job for those 6 years, my sister, was to work with those 40 kids and their families, and I was the guy that drove the white van around picking the kids up from school and taking them home at night after tutoring. And after 6 years when they graduated from high school, our class had a 91% graduation rate. UIC did a study. The class that was 1 year ahead of ours from Shakespeare had a 33% graduation rate from high school. So same kids, same neighborhoods, same families, same buildings, same everything, just slightly different opportunities, slightly different opportunity structure over time, wildly different outcomes. During that time, we started a small public school in the neighborhood because there were no good public schools, called Area Community Academy. We're all getting a little older. That was '97, so it was more than 20 years ago. It was funded in part, it's a traditional public school, but a public-private partnership, Aerial Capital Management, run by my best friend, John Rogers, partnered with us, and had an investment curriculum, which was his genius, his brainchild. And starting in 6th grade, kids actually invest in the stock market, not play money, not a stock market game, but real money. And they invest for 3 years. The principal gets returned to the next class. They keep a piece for college scholarships long term, and they make a philanthropic gift. But their ability to pick stocks has been as good as a lot of professionals. And it's just, again, about creating real opportunity for real kids and running them through the paces and letting them, trust in their judgment. And they've done an extraordinary job there. From there, I went to go work for Chicago Public Schools and then lead them. And lots I could say I'm proud of and happy to talk about successes of increasing graduation rates and really focusing on keeping freshmen on track. And a recent study came out of Stanford University, Sean Reardon, saying Chicago's been the fastest improving school district in the country. It has a heck of a long way to go. I would say it's not getting better fast enough. Those things I'm proud of. I'll tell you one story that's a little bit proud, but it's just a little challenging as well. So we focus a lot on increasing the number of kids taking and passing AP classes, and really put a spotlight on that. In every start of school year, we meet with all our principals in high school, all the administrators, and walk through the data and see what progress we were making. We tracked it every single year, and over about a 4-year span, we doubled the number of kids taking and passing AP classes. And at the start of that school year, rah, 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 we had a big celebration. Some schools had 3-4 times increases. And that felt great, but in a room was probably 600 people. At the end of that, I just asked a question: does anyone think our kids today are twice as smart as they were 4 years ago? And the room got real quiet, because we hope the kids were a little bit smarter. Hopefully they were. Hopefully we're doing some things different. But the only thing that had changed was we had created some opportunities that didn't exist before. And kids had met us more than halfway. And folks who had committed their lives to education, who had given everything every single day, were doing some great things, but at the same time, they were systemically denying opportunity. And we know exactly who was being denied opportunity. Our district was 85% minority, 90% poverty. And so the children being denied the opportunity to take and pass AP classes were black and brown kids. And for me, it's not just taking those classes. For so many of our kids who are first-generation college goers, passing those AP classes plants a seed in their minds that maybe college is obtainable. Maybe it's not some foreign planet where I don't belong. Maybe I have the ability to compete here. And so the denial of that opportunity wasn't just about a college credit. It was the denial of a dream. And trying to change the culture and the mindset was so hugely important. From there, I was lucky enough to work for President Obama for 7 years, trying to figure out the federal role. A lot of focus on incentives, carrots, not sticks. And again, happy to talk and debate any of this stuff. But I think the 3 things the federal government should focus on is equity, a fight for the kids who need the most help, excellence, having a high bar for everyone, and innovation and trying to drive change in the country. As you guys know better than anyone, education moves way too slow. Education moves at this glacial speed. And I think so many of you have devoted your lives to trying to increase and pick up the pace of change. One thing the federal government can and should do, and we try to do a lot, never enough, and unfortunately we've seen a walking away from some of this is just incentivize and support innovation, and where you're getting breakthrough results at any level, urban, rural, early childhood, higher ed, where you're getting higher graduation rates, where we're reducing dropout rates, where you're closing achievement gap, just taking to scale the great work that's going on out there. One of the joys of my job was traveling the country, going to all 50 states, going to hundreds and hundreds of schools around the country. And there were definitely things that broke my heart that I saw, but there was so much that gave me hope. But the massive frustration is that for every problem we have, it's being solved somewhere. We just don't learn it and scale and replicate it fast enough. And again, I know that's what so many of you are working on. So just stepping back, I tried to just sort of summarize lessons over, from birth till now, lessons that get happy to debate, happy to get disagreement on, but things that trying to crystallize some themes that I think are so important for us to go to the next level. Not just for our kids, but for our country. The first, to me, will always be early childhood education. I think that's the best investment we can make, and so many of us spend all of our time trying to play catch up. And if we can just get our babies off to a good start at 3 and 4 and enter kindergarten ready to be successful academically, socially, emotionally, they're on track the rest of their lives. Obviously, the dirty secret in education is we often don't play catch up well. And those kids who start behind often never catch up. You can draw a straight line from those that start behind and those that eventually drop out and become incarcerated. The average child in the United States coming from a disadvantaged community starts kindergarten at 5 years old, a year to 18 months behind. That's the norm. So when we fail to provide those opportunities, they're starting not at baseline, they're starting below ground level. James Heckman, a Nobel Prize winning economist at the University of Chicago, much, much smarter than I am, he studied this for decades. He sees a 7-to-1 ROI. For every dollar we invest in high-quality pre-K, we as a society, we as a nation get back $7. I don't know too many other programs of our scarce tax dollars where we're getting 7-to-1 ROI. Less incarceration, less dropouts, less teenage pregnancy, more folks graduating, more folks becoming productive citizens, more folks working. So I say if I had one more tax dollar, I would try and use that to get another kid into a high-quality pre-K program. The second one, and again, I know it's what drives so many of you guys, is that poverty is not destiny. And I grew up working in a poor community all my life. I can give you story after story of young people, including Carrie Holly, who beat all the odds and went on to do extraordinary things. I thought I knew poverty from the south and west side of Chicago. I'd never been to a Native American reservation until I moved to D.C. That's an entirely different level of challenge. Coming out of the government, I was talking to Paul earlier, spent a little time in refugee camps, came back from a week in Haiti a couple weeks ago. There's poverty and then there's a different level of poverty. But poverty is never destiny, and you see huge variation. Poorest kids in Shanghai are outperforming the wealthiest kids in the United States right now on the PISA exams. And in all those communities everywhere, you have this amazing talent that if we can step up and provide opportunity and do it in a structured, systemic way, amazing things can happen. Are things harder in poor communities and violent communities? Of course they are, in refugee communities. But there's no lack of talent. It's our lack of investment that maintains a status quo in a caste system that I think is devastating, not just for our country, but for countries across the globe. Tied to that, there's a lot of talk about sort of equal versus equity. What do kids need? Equal is giving every kid the same thing. Every kid a teacher, every kid a laptop, every kid a school lunch. That's a starting point maybe. I think equal is absolutely insufficient. What we have to provide as adults, as educators, as leaders, is equity. We have to figure out what kids need. My wife and I, our two kids, if they have no musical skills, but they want to play the trumpet or play the piano or want to do something, we could afford to do that. They could have those opportunities. Our kids in these communities across the country and across the globe don't have that. When I led the Chicago Public Schools, there were a series of kids, thousands of kids, that we provided 3 meals a day to, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because if we didn't feed them, they weren't going to eat. We had a couple thousand kids that we very quietly, discreetly sent them home with backpacks full of food on Fridays because we worried about them not eating during the weekend. And one of the things I learned from my mother, she was very basic things. If a kid's stomach's growling, it's hard to learn. Every day, as soon as kids came in, she fed them every single day. And so thinking about what does every kid need? Do they need 1 meal a day? Do they need 3 meals a day? Do Do they need 6 hours of school, or do they need 12 hours of school? Do some kids need 24 hours, residential schools? When I went to college out east, I met a lot of kids who had gone to these fancy boarding schools I had never heard of. Andover and Exeter and Deerfield, and it seemed to work pretty well for them. I think what works for the wealthy probably works for the poor pretty well. And in poor communities where families sometimes aren't tight and where violence is prevalent, what if we had some boarding schools for the kids who need the most help, like the Andovers and like the Exeters? That's not equal, that's equity. So really thinking about how we give kids what they need. This is an obvious point, I think, for folks here, but I can't overstate the importance of great teachers. And again, not just having a teacher, but having a great teacher. We can talk about test scores, we can talk about graduation rates, we should talk about all those things. You guys probably saw Raj Chettiar, economist at Harvard, did a longitudinal study, millions of records of kids coming out of New York public schools. And if those middle school students had one good teacher during those years, that class had an additional $250,000 in lifetime earnings. One good teaching. So this is not about test scores, it's not about graduation rates, it's about what that teacher does, not just to teach content, but to create some hope and some optimism, some belief in yourself. And so whatever we can do to give every kid, but particularly kids who need the most help, the best teachers, the access to the best talent, there's no substitute for that. Tied to that is there's a lot of conversation always and should be about small class size. And again, as a parent, I would love my kids to go to small classes. But I just want to challenge that conventional wisdom. We as parents, we want that. Unions support that because smaller classes mean more teachers. It means more union dues. But just a little thought experiment for all of you that are parents or kids young or old. If you had a chance for your child to go to a class of 20 with a mediocre teacher or a class of 25 with a great teacher, which would you choose? I would choose the class of 25. Let's take another step. Class of 20 with a mediocre teacher, class size of 30. I'd take 30. 35, 40, I'd go pretty high. I mean, we can get to a breaking point maybe at 50 or something. But the point is not just reduce class size. The point is give our kids access to great talent and how we nurture that talent and develop that talent, support that talent, have that talent touch more kids. We are so not creative. We are so traditional in how we do that. We treat every English teacher as the same, every biology teacher is the same, every algebra teacher is the same, when in fact some teachers are getting this wildly disproportionate positive outcomes for kids. That's one good teacher, $250,000. Think about 3 good teachers in a row. In the counter, think about 3 bad teachers in a row and where that leaves that kid. Makes it hard for them to ever be in a room like this, starting at a very, very early age. There's also a debate, obviously, about teachers versus technology. My personal opinion is that teachers will never be replaced by technology. All the studies show blended learning, great instruction, great technology, empowers teachers, engages students, helps with families. For me, that's a false debate. It's just great teachers coupled with great technology help put kids in a very different spot in terms of learning. Fifth, I have 2 more points, and I'll open it up. Is it what are we trying to prepare kids for? Which is what you guys are thinking about, and a lot of folks here are much more expert at this than I am. But I don't think our kids are going to be prepared for a job. They're going to create their own jobs going forward. And obviously with Google and other things and rote memorization is sort of not what we need. For me, it's less content knowledge that kids need, but it's sort of a set of skills and habits and characteristics that will serve them in whatever they do as they go forward. I'll just sort of try and run through these things. Obviously, the ability to be a critical thinker, to solve problems, to distill and synthesize information, to work as part of a diverse team, to not be scared, to not be intimidated, not to be put down others, but to solve tough problems together, to be a lifelong learner, to have a joy of learning, to be motivated by problems, not intimidated by them. What we don't need, obviously, I think, is the rote memorization of facts, which we still sometimes see, and a false sense of security of mastery, that I've mastered algebra, I've mastered biology, and I can move on. And I don't even have a good name for this, maybe habits of mind or characteristics or character traits, but curiosity, imagination, empathy, resilience, those are the kinds of things, an entrepreneurial mindset. Those are the kinds of things, if we can instill those in kids at an early age, they can do well, whatever. There's a set of jobs going away. We know that. That presents some real challenges. People say, what's going to happen to work? I think work today, maybe more than ever before, work is about solving problems. And last time I looked, we got a lot of problems to solve. I don't think we're running out of any problems, domestically, internationally. Start running out of problems, and I get worried. So for me, as long as we got plenty of problems to solve, we got plenty of work to do. The question is, are our kids prepared to do that work? Can they engage in those conversations, and they help to solve problems? And if they do, I don't care about their backgrounds, they're going to be wildly successful. If they're locked out of those things, then again, we sort of perpetuate a haves and have-not system that for me is intolerable. And the final thing is, obviously this is more domestically focused, but education for me is the one place where there should be no competition. Like a rising tide lifts all boats. Urban, suburban, rural, Native American reservations, internationally, globally, we should all be helping each other, learning from each other. One of the things I loved best when I was Secretary of Education, we'd do an international summit every year and bring in about 24 countries that were either high-performing or rapidly improving. And yes, there's always cultural context and there's always differences, but at the end of the day, the common challenges are huge, the common solutions are there, and the more we're learning from each other, there's no competition between schools, between districts, between states. A rising tide lifts all boats. And if we can find ways to speed up that learning curve, to help each other, to share not just our successes, but our failures, where we struck out, where we made mistakes, to help others avoid those pitfalls, we need it. The final thing I'll stop, is that obviously it's an interesting time politically in the country, and without getting into my personal political beliefs, we have to have a well-educated citizenry. We have to have people who are able to engage and to participate and to vote and to share. And we know education, or I believe education is the only pathway out of poverty. I think education is the only way to keep high-wage, high-skilled jobs in our communities, in our states, in our nation. I think it's the only way to have a good middle-class job where you can pay the rent and take care of your family and own your home. So we know all the economic benefits of education. I would argue without taking education to a different level for all in our country now, that our democracy starts to shake. It starts to break down around the margins. And if we have a set of young people, whether it's on inner city Chicago, whether it's in Appalachia, who are locked out of quality education, who aren't a part of the American dream, where there are no jobs for them, then our country starts to crumble. There's so much hope and opportunity in education. That's obviously the passion. I'll just close and open up for your questions. That my work has shifted a little bit, just going home to Chicago, looking at the devastating level of violence. That was a crisis facing the city, so I've just obsessed and laser focused with trying to reduce violence in Chicago for the past 2.5 years. I'm going to stay with it, hopefully for the next 5 at least, and see, we're making some progress. We have a long way to go. But the obvious point of all the young men I'm working with, and these are the guys who are doing the shooting and being shot in Chicago on the south and west sides, I don't have a college graduate amongst them. Folks who have had educational opportunity aren't caught in that. So for me, it's not just about the upside. It's not just about a thriving democracy. It's not just about breaking cycles of poverty. The consequences for not providing an education in places like Chicago is life and death. And we have kids growing up with a level of fear and trauma that thankfully almost none of us in this room know. I'm in schools every 2 weeks, was in a school late last week, class of about 35. I always ask, how many of you know someone who's been shot? 32 hands go up. And then I go, how many know 5? How many know 10? How many know 15? You often have half the class with their hands up. That's just real. And our kids, it's become normalized. And again, they're growing up with fear and trauma that we can't imagine. Our whole life, I've preached deferred gratification, plan for long term, go to college. If you're trying to survive every day, particularly for our young African-American boys who don't think they're going to live, I'm talking about college and I'm speaking Greek. I'm speaking a foreign language. They're just trying to survive. And so, again, the consequences for them for our young men and young women not receiving a quality education has this devastating impact on the community. So I'll stop there, take any questions on any of this stuff you have, but thank you for your commitment, thank you for your hard work. We have to get better faster together. Thank you.
child deserves and needs a great teacher. How do we make that happen?
That's your guys' job to solve. My short answer, also for the United States, we can talk globally, is education should be the ultimate bipartisan issue. There's nothing left or right or Democrat or Republican or whatever, conservative, liberal, about giving kid access to great education, early childhood, elementary, middle, high school, college. None of us vote on education. None of us vote. So last election, midterm, 6% of people went to the voting booth thinking about education. So I don't care where you are on the political spectrum. I want mayors, I want governors, I want congressmen, I want senators, I want the President of the United States to be held accountable for increasing achievement and increasing access and making sure young people are being successful. And if they do that, they keep their job, and if they don't, they lose their job. So we all say we care about education. In my book, I talk about lies. If you survey us, we all say we care. None of us vote on education. And for me, that would change everything. I don't care your politics, I don't care your idea. If we went to the voting booth and voted and held politicians accountable for results, this thing would change very, very fast. Until we do that, there's no politician that says they're anti-education. They just don't have to produce results. And I would say I don't blame them as politicians, I blame us. That for me is the missing. We can talk policy, we can talk strategy. Someone's got to be in charge, someone's got to be accountable. Until that happens, we're not going to get there.
Students and problems, and obviously there are plenty of them in education. And when you think about the system, there are administrators, obviously, and there are teachers and teachers' unions. But I feel like students are somewhat unrepresented. They don't have the sort of collective bargaining force at the table. They don't have a voice at the table. Even. And I wonder, you're working individually with students, and we've even seen, the students of Stone and Douglas High School have incredible maturity and ability to grapple with hard problems that are complex on a national stage. How do you think about engaging the students in the area where it matters most to their lives today?
Those kids are remarkable. I've done a bunch with them and actually paired them with our kids in Chicago, and to see that's a whole nother conversation. It's been unbelievably moving. And one quick story is, again, radically different backgrounds, whatever, and I sent a bunch of 6 of our kids down to Emma Gonzalez's home to talk this stuff through, and she lives in a gated community. Our kids didn't know what a gated community was. She thought their family lived in jail, trying to figure out what the family had done wrong. You talk about cultural, just a different world. Our kids hadn't flown before. But at the end is a sort of unbelievable transformational day, and at the end of it, one of our young guys, Alex King, said, our shared pain makes us family. So differences of race and class and sociality and geography. I hate that our kids are bonding over shared pain and over issues of loss and mass shootings, but there's a power there. I just think we have to listen. They're so smart. They're so brilliant. It's not even as opposed to other voices of whoever, parents, teachers, unions, whatever. Our kids, not just in high school, middle school, they know who their good teachers are. They know what's working. They know what's looking for. It's like we're scared of the truth. And I would tell you that the most honest conversations I have are with kids. Like adults will, tell me what they think I want to hear, or play the politics and couch their words. Kids just give it to you straight up. And it's so refreshing and so helpful. And so if we can ask them, do you feel safe? Are you learning? What do you need? They know. We just don't. So there's student surveys. There's all kinds of qualitative, quantitative ways to do this. The question isn't just, are we willing to listen? We talk about student voice. The question is, are we willing to act and change policy, change classes, change extracurriculars based upon what they're looking for? Just one interesting, with the Stoneman Douglas kids, it's a big school, and a set of kids emerged as leaders. And they weren't actually the student government leaders. They weren't the big-time jocks. They weren't the people we traditionally think of leaders. They were in the theater. They were on the debate team. They sort of talked about themselves as sort of the not cool kids, the outcasts, but they were very socially conscious. And they knew how to research. They knew how to solve problems. And so even if you go listen, if you go to the traditional sources, those traditional sources are amazing too, but they were said the kids who were doing the hard work are kids who would be a little bit under the radar. But again, their wisdom, their intelligence, their ability to change the national conversation has been extraordinary. So we got to not just listen, we got to act. We got to act.
Arne, LA Unified just had their first strike.
I'm well aware.
After 30 years.
Yeah.
After 30 years. And the elephant in the room was the charter school movement in Los Angeles. I wonder if you could share your feelings about the charter school movement. And
Yeah, the strike was an interesting one because they settled for exactly what they were offered before the strike. So it really wasn't about the money, it was about trying to make a point. So on charters, I always say, I'm not a fan of charters, I'm a fan of good schools. And there are amazing, amazing charters that are phenomenal. There are charters that need to be closed. Some of the best schools I've ever visited, including one last week in Chicago, friend of Deborah's, April Gobble, the KIPP schools, they're changing kids' lives every day. So for me, all these debates are adult, I call it adult dysfunction, charters versus traditionals. We just need more great schools, and of every form or fashion. For me in education, it's always both in college versus careers. We need a hell of a lot more kids going to college. We need a lot more kids prepared for the world of work. It's not either or, it's not tracking. So where we have high-performing charters, we need to learn from them and replicate and help them grow. Where we have low-performing charters, we should close them down. Where we have high-performing traditional schools, we should replicate and learn and see them grow. We have poor-performing traditional schools, we should close them down. And so the name charter tells me nothing about quality. Show me your results, show me your evidence, show me your data, and when you're getting good results, let's learn and help you grow. So we put in DC, we put hundreds of millions of dollars behind high-performing charters to replicate, and I felt great about that. But I also went to the National Charter Convention and said you have a set of schools that are actually dropout factories. And you need to stop hiding behind the charter mantra that's actually hurting your brand and to have some accountability there for those schools.
Some philosophy, the role of school. So you hear.
Sorry, just be able to.
Love to get your take about the role of school. So you mentioned, right, the importance of media series, and we know how some of the other impacts outside of school play a role in academic performance, whether it be identity development, healthcare, social emotional component. Now, when we think of the actual school, we think about great teachers and what they're called to do, right? How far do you feel that needs to be in the school, right? Even though there's so many things outside of them that are actually impacting what that performance.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think of school buildings not as schools, but as community centers. And we have lots of challenges in education, lots of lack of resources and whatever. We have 100,000 schools in America. Rich neighborhood, poor neighborhood, black neighborhood, white neighborhood, Latino. We don't necessarily need, some neighborhoods need more schools. We got a lot of buildings. Those buildings are amazing community assets, and they don't belong to the principal or to the teachers or to the union. They belong to the community. So I think those schools should be open 11, 12 hours a day. I think they should be open 6, 7 days a week all summer. And to be clear, I'm not saying the teachers need to work 12 hours a day, but bring in the nonprofits, bring in the social service agencies, bring in the churches. And after school academic enrichment, drama, arts, music, sports, academic decathlon, yearbook, parenting classes, GED classes, ESL classes, family literacy classes, a third meal for families. We had about 150 schools in Chicago that became community centers where you had some days 100 parents coming to school every day for their own education. When that happened, those kids are going to be just fine. Lots of neighborhoods, the neighborhoods aren't safe. So we sweep the kids out onto the street at 2:33, and who knows what happens. And so again, for me, it's not assigning kids 12 hours a day. My kids might not need that, but some kids need, 6 hours for many kids is not nearly enough. 8 hours is enough. 10, they need 12. They might need 14. Again, some need 24. And so I just think we have to think very, very differently about what a school building does. And school being an important part of what they do, but just a starting point. And if our schools, again, particularly in disadvantaged communities, can become true community centers and engage the entire community, when that school becomes the hub, the heartbeat of that area, of that neighborhood, great things are going to happen.
It's great to hear you say these hotspots for innovation in schools all across the country. But I'm curious, when you say they're not scaling fast enough, and we all know that, what are the mechanisms that you see that are helping to increase the pace?
Yeah, so this one isn't hard. So we had something, again, we made plenty of mistakes and happy to talk about all of those, but we had something called the Invest in Innovation Fund, I3 Fund, where it was a sort of a radical concept. We gave a lot of money to people who had a lot of evidence, $50 million plus. We gave a medium amount of money for people who had medium evidence, and we gave smaller, $5 million to groups that, emerging, but not there yet. we were able to fund about 5 to 6% of the applicants that we got in. There were so many more good ideas than we had money available. And again, this is not politics. It's not my idea. It wasn't Barack's idea. It's just you show us what you're doing to increase graduation rates. You show us what you're doing to close achievement gaps, and we'll put money behind that. We got pushback, yes, from Republicans, and we got pushback from Democrats as well. Because traditionally, the Department of Education, federal level, you give out block grants. You give everybody the same. You give everybody the same slice of the pie. And we were still doing that with Title I and Title II. We were saying, but places where we're getting results, let's give them a little bit more money to serve a lot more kids. To give you one example, there was a group in Appalachia of small rural districts that was doing some extraordinary stuff to close it, to raise graduation rates. They were really moving the needle. We were able to put a lot of money behind them and have them serve more kids in more schools. We got scaled back, and that's basically disappeared. And so I think, again, not our ideas, not our expertise, just resources to grow and expand. For me, that's a huge role the federal government should be playing. We got into the game. Jim Shelton led that effort, did a great job. My sense is that's disappeared. And again, there was so much more demand than we had dollars available even then.
I wanted to ask you, just knowing that we have the benefit of hindsight, a policy question and a political question. So the policy question is looking backward now. At what level, if you were advising government leaders at all three levels of our system, federal, state, and local, what policy interventions would you think would go furthest toward achieving that kind of equity that you're talking about and setting a better opportunity agenda for kids who don't inherit the social capital or opportunity of birth? And then secondly, how do you get a sense of urgency around this? Where does the demand for this come from? Politically, we're now in an era very unlike where we were 25 or 30 years ago, where we had corporate leaders and government leaders flocking to education, wanting to be the education governor, the education CEO. And now most of our business leaders and corporate leaders and government leaders have fled the mainstream education space because of the civil wars in the space over testing or Common Core charters, and are now looking for outside-in kinds of solutions. It's very hard to get public leaders, you mentioned the elections, even talking about education.
Good to see you. Two hard questions. I shouldn't have called on you. So on equity, again, I think the first one's actually easy to articulate. It's harder to do. Two quick things. The easy one is thinking very differently about time. In schools, this fixed amount of time. And I think the time should be the variable. And whether it's competency-based stuff where kids can move faster, and if you know algebra in 2 days or 2 weeks or a year, you move faster. That's competency versus seat time. That's one. But just thinking about what different kids need, and do they need 8 hours of instruction and enrichment and extracurriculars and sports and mentoring and healthcare? Do they need 12 hours? And we don't differentiate there. We give the same dose of medicine, the same intervention for all kids. And that makes no sense in the medical world. It makes no sense in education. So just seeing time as a variable, not the constant, would be a game changer. The second one, and it's interesting that I always got pushback that we were reaching overreach at the federal level, and there's some valid critique of us in that. The flip side of that is we have 15,000 school districts. The theory is that 15,000 school districts are laboratories of innovation, lots of creativity there. So if we believe that great teaching matters, which I do, 15,000 school districts, I traveled everywhere. I asked every time I asked the question, show me one school district out of 15,000 that's identifying their most successful teachers and principals and putting them in their most underserved communities, in most underserved schools. And in 15,000 school districts, there's not a single school district in America that systemically identifies that talent and puts them in critical mass for the kids who need the most help. So we're just not honest. We're not honest. And it's hard, and there's all kinds of complicated politics. How do you identify them? How would you incentivize that? If we honestly believe that great teachers matter and great principals matter, we do nothing to give them to the kids who need the most help. And in fact, all the incentives go the opposite way, for the best to go to the more affluent communities and get paid more into the easier schools. And so for me, the two things, it's talent, that's talent, and time. Time's a little bit easier. Talent's hard, but that's the breakthrough. And if we may always, when President Obama made the decision to go after Osama bin Laden, who did he send? He sent the Navy SEALs. He sent the best of the best to do the hardest job. He didn't send a bunch of rookies. He didn't just go find 10 people in the Army to volunteer to go do that. He got the most highly trained, the most disciplined, the most competent to take on the hardest, most important work. I don't like the military analogy, but it's the same. Talent matters. He found the most talent to do the most important thing. In education, we just send anybody to go do the most important thing. So we get back what we deserve. On the urgency, I don't have a great answer. I think obviously in an international economy, a global economy, a flat world, our multinational companies can get talent from anywhere. So if we're not producing the talent, they get it from India, China, or wherever, and that's fair. What I hope is starting to change maybe is not just their economic interests, but their concern for our democracy. And I can't say I've seen that yet, but I do believe our democracy is fraying. And I think we're divided, yes, by race and class, and that's fair. I don't want to blow through those divisions. My personal opinion is we are much more divided now based upon economic opportunity. And those who are the most angry aren't just African American, Latino, it's folks in poor white communities who the world is passing them by and they're terrified. And guess what? They should be terrified. They should be terrified. That's not paranoia, that's real for them. And so for me, if again, corporate leaders, political leaders, if people start to see our democracy fraying, the only way I know how to knit it back together, to have people participate, is to equalize access to a high-quality education. But that absence now is huge, is deafening, and very, very concerning. I'll go back again. If we voted on this, that would change it. How we get people to vote, that's where we're clearly, if 6% of people voted on this, we're not where we need to be.
We have time for one more question.
My friend Carmita.
One of the brilliant things that you've done with Craig is seeing the shooters as the place for the greatest intervention, which I think one of the underlying sort of beliefs there is that you understand that they are assets, that there is something, they are not lost causes, they are not things to be fixed, they are actually individuals to be invested in. And in a world where so much of the innovation that's happening in K-12, in my opinion, is rooted in a belief that our young people are things to be fixed, or that there are deficits, rooted in this deficit mentality. What can you tell us about what you've learned from the early results of your investment in these folks that are so often cast aside, that can help us think about that in our world and what it would look like if we saw the potential, the beauty, and the genius in our young people that you have so well seen in these young men?
It's a good question to end on. I'll try and keep it short, but it goes back to sort of the original question about listening. So it's not just our results, and we're getting there. Again, 2016 was our worst year of violence. That's when we started. 2017, we're down 15%. 2018, we're down another 15%. Our goal for 2019, which is ambitious, is to try and go down another 30%. If we can do that, we get below 400 homicides, which is still crazy, but we haven't been below 400 homicides since 1965. So it'd be a 54, 55-year low. So that's what we're shooting for. So not just the results, but our entire program was set by the guys telling us what they wanted. So I got all my ideas by visiting Cook County Jail and just bouncing ideas off of guys. And this sounds really crazy. I'm not being funny. I much prefer going to Cook County Jail than I did testifying before Congress. I'm not being funny. It's a much, much more honest conversation, and I learned so much more. And guys will say that's a great idea. Guys will say you're crazy. They'll say that's never work. And you get an honest feedback. They have no agenda other than to tell you the truth. There's no agenda. And so all of our strategies, everything we do, was actually shaped by, call it focus groups, call it what you want, them just giving us feedback of what are the jobs, what's the price point, and what do they need. And so I always, they're co-designers. And if something's working, great, we'll keep going. If it's not working, we won't. give you a million anecdotes, two quick stories that, guys' safety is an issue and being targets, and we were going to buy some vans and transport, vans, trying to make it easier, and having issues with cars. And one of our guys has said, Arne, you can buy a van. I'm not getting in it. I'm like, why won't you get in the van? He's like, I'm not safe. I got people, if I'm stuck in a van, I can't move. I will never get in your van. I'm like, okay, we won't buy a van. But that wouldn't have occurred to me. The epiphany I had, which shows I'm not very smart, was that if you want to stop shooting, you have to work with shooters. There are lots of other things we'd like to do that are easier. But I would say the rest of it, we're not shooting people. We got to work with people who are shooting people and get them to change behavior. So you have to make yourself uncomfortable and sort of move into that space. So all the ideas, all the brilliance, all the stuff that comes from them. None of that comes from us. I'm not just saying that, it's the truth. Where this is a crazy world, we talk about assets and redemption. We do a lot of different things: job stuff, trauma care, substance abuse. We've had a whole bunch of guys get high school diplomas, hard and soft skills. We have employers hiring after they work with us for a while. But I would argue the most important thing we do is we have every guy has a life coach, and we have life coaches who have lived a life and can identify and work. We have this amazing group. Probably our hard to say, but probably our best life coach is a guy named Billy Moore. If we go back 34 years ago, Billy Moore killed one of my good friends. Billy Moore killed a guy named Benji Wilson, who was the best basketball player not in Chicago, but in the United States. And that was in 1984, and I still remember I was in college when I got that call that Benji had been killed. And I didn't know Billy Moore. I hated Billy Moore all my life. And connected with him a little over 2 years ago. He's done as much or more than anybody in our program to save lives and change behavior. And for me to learn to forgive and move on, it's a deeply, deeply humbling and interesting lesson. Last summer, Billy Moore's own son was killed, shot 16 times. And what Billy has said, and we travel together and he's talked publicly, he says that if the guy who killed his son walked into his program, he would mentor him and work with him, because if he needed that opportunity, how can he deny that to somebody else? So I get chills talking about this stuff. It's this very different world. But Billy Moore, who I hated all my life, has a depth of compassion and understanding that I'm still trying to get there. And because of him, because of our young men, they're the ones who are going to lead us where we need to go. Thank you.